April 1943. 27,000 feet over northern France. The Luftwaffe pilots spot them first, massive silver dots climbing slowly toward the clouds. Someone laughs through the intercom, flying milk bottles. The P-47 Thunderbolt looks absurd next to the sleek Focke-Wulf 190's broad wings, stubby nose, and a body that seems to defy flight itself. German pilots joke that it must have been designed by a blacksmith. Heavy, clumsy, too slow for a real dogfight. But the laughter doesn't last long. The first pair of Thunderbolts level out, sunlight flashing off their wings. A heartbeat later, a low rumble, then 8 synchronized flashes. Each P-47 spits out a storm 850 caliber Browning machine guns firing together, 3,400 rounds in less than a minute. That's almost 6,000 bullets per second, cutting the air into ribbons. The German formation scatters. The laughter is gone, replaced by the metallic roar of 50s and the crack of cannon shells bursting in the thin air. One Thunderbolt takes a direct hit. Oil sprays across the canopy. Flames lick the fuselage. But somehow, it keeps flying. Its pilot fights the controls, dives through his own smoke trail, and brings the crippled plane back toward the channel. When he lands, ground crews count more than 200 holes in the airframe, wings shredded, tail nearly torn off. And yet, the Jug survived. The German pilots had been right about one thing: it was heavy. But they hadn't understood what that meant. The P-47 wasn't built to dance. It was built to endure, to dive faster than anything else in the sky, to turn raw horsepower into a weapon. What began as laughter at 27,000 feet ended as shock and silence, because in the next few months, the flying milk bottle would become the most feared sound in the European sky, thunder of A-50s raining lead. In 1939, as Europe burned, one man in New York stared at a blank sheet of drafting paper and began sketching what looked impossible. His name was Alexander Kartveli, a Georgian immigrant working for Republic Aviation. His new design, the XP-47B, would soon become the most powerful single-engine fighter ever built. But first, almost everyone thought he'd lost his mind. The US Army had asked for a nimble interceptor, fast, light, quick to climb. Kartveli instead drew a monster, a 10,000-pound machine twice the weight of most fighters, with wings thick enough to walk on, and an engine so large it needed its own air tunnels. When engineers saw the blueprints, someone joked, "This thing won't fly, it'll plow." They called it a dinosaur, a flying milk bottle, a bomber pretending to be a fighter. And yet, Kartveli knew something the others didn't. He had watched Europe's skies fill with high-altitude bombers and turbo-supercharged engines. The future of air combat, he believed, wasn't in the turn fight, it was in altitude and horsepower. So he built a fighter around the biggest piston engine ever made, the Pratt & Whitney R2800 Double Wasp, 18 cylinders, 2,000 horsepower. The engine alone weighed more than an entire Japanese Zero, but Kartveli wasn't done. He added something radical, a turbo-supercharger loop that ran the length of the aircraft. Exhaust from the engine spun a turbine, which drove a compressor that packed air back into the cylinders. Then an intercooler chilled it before it went in again. The result? The P-47 could breathe at 30,000 feet as easily as a Zero at sea level. That long ducting twisting through the fuselage like a steel intestine gave the Thunderbolt its bulk. It also gave it an unmatched edge, power at altitude. When the prototype first took off, test pilots braced for disaster. Instead, the dinosaur climbed like a rocket. Its radial engine thundered so loud that Republic's factory windows rattled miles away. The P-47B roared through its first tests at over 400 miles per hour, faster than most fighters of its era. But there was a catch: it handled like a freight train. Pilots complained about its roll rate. Its climb below 10,000 feet was sluggish. Compared to the nimble Spitfire or the agile Bf-109, the Thunderbolt felt wrong, too heavy, too slow, too late. The critics lined up again. A bomber-sized fighter will never survive a dogfight. And on paper they were right. Yet the P-47 wasn't designed to win dogfights. It was designed to win wars of endurance. It could dive faster than anything in the sky, shrug off hits that would shred lighter planes. And thanks to that giant turbo loop fight, where Luftwaffe engines began to choke, in the summer of 1942, American pilots looked at their new mount and wondered what they were supposed to do with it. They had a machine that could climb to the stratosphere, but not turn worth a damn. They could outrun German planes in a dive, but couldn't follow them in a turn. Was this really the answer to the Luftwaffe? For the moment, the skeptics were winning. Early Thunderbolts crashed from mechanical failures. Training accidents mounted. Ground crews cursed the complicated turbo system that seemed to break as often as it worked. But behind every frustration was untapped potential. Every engineer who studied the flight data saw the same numbers: incredible energy retention, stability in dives, and a ceiling no German plane could match. Kartveli smiled quietly. He knew the truth: the P-47 wasn't a ballerina. It was a sledgehammer. A weapon designed not to outturn the enemy, but to outlast him. Still, there was one question that no blueprint could answer. Fine, it could climb. It could dive. It could take a beating. But could it fight? Early results said no, or did they? Spring 1943. The Thunderbolt finally goes to war. Fresh from American assembly lines, squadrons of brand-new P-47Cs roll across muddy British airfields. The paint is still drying. The pilots, mostly young, mostly untested, climb into machines they barely understand. At first, they hate them. Training accidents are constant. A moment's inattention on takeoff, and the P-47's massive prop torque yanks the plane left hard. One pilot describes it simply: "You don't fly the jug, you wrestle it." The first month of combat confirms every doubt. The 4th Fighter Group, veterans of the RAF, takes Thunderbolts across the Channel on high-cover patrols. On paper, it's the most advanced fighter in the sky. In practice, it feels like a bad joke. German FW-190s dive from above, slice through the formation and vanish. The P-47s can't turn fast enough to catch them, can't climb fast enough to chase them. Radio calls are filled with frustration. They go up, we go down. They turn, we stall. What the hell are we supposed to do with this thing? By the end of April, the kill-to-loss ratio is dismal. The Luftwaffe owns the mid-altitudes. The Thunderbolt's strength, high-altitude performance isn't being used. Worse, a new problem emerges: compressibility. In dives past 500 miles per hour, the controls lock up. A pilot tries to pull out nothing. The stick might as well be welded in place. One after another, Thunderbolts plunge into the ground during mock dogfights or pursuit dives. No one understands why. Word spreads through the squadrons: don't dive the jug. For a fighter that relies on diving to fight, that's a death sentence. Instructors scramble to teach survival tricks. Ease into the dive. Cut throttle early. Don't fight the stick, ride it out until thinner air releases it. Still, fear creeps in. One British observer writes, "The Americans have built a sledgehammer and handed it to men who only know how to swing a rapier." German pilots notice. They exploit every weakness. At medium altitude, 15 to 20,000 feet, the Luftwaffe attacks in tight spirals, forcing Thunderbolts to turn. The 190s roll faster, climb sharper, dance around the heavier American fighters. In mockery, some German units nickname the P-47 Der Bulle. The bull strong, stupid, and slow to turn. The only advantage the jug pilots have is firepower: 8 Browning 50s, 4 in each wing. But even that seems wasted. In early engagements, gunners report hits dozens, sometimes hundreds, with little effect. German planes limp home riddled with holes but still flying. The 50s should have been decisive. So why didn't they save them yet? Because the pilots weren't using them the way the plane was built to fight. They were trying to dogfight, to turn, to duel. The P-47 wasn't meant for that. It was meant for something else, something that would soon change air combat forever. But in the spring of '43, no one sees that yet. Squadrons return from missions exhausted and demoralized. Out of 12 planes, maybe one victory if they're lucky. Some pilots privately wish for Spitfires. Others beg command for more training time. Still, there are glimmers of hope. A handful of veterans begin experimenting. They notice something strange. The heavier the jug gets fuel, ammo, even drop tanks, the better it handles in a dive. They start flying higher, climbing to 30,000 feet, then diving in fast, one pass and gone. The Germans can't follow that. Not safely. An American captain sketches the tactic on a briefing room board, a steep downward arrow. Next to it he writes 2 words: boom and zoom. The old habits, turning, twisting, dogfighting, begin to die. A new style is being born. And when those pilots finally learn how to unleash the jug's guns, when they learn how to make those 850s speak the laughter from the air, Luftwaffe will vanish completely. But first, the Americans still have to survive their baptism of fire. By mid-1943, something became clear: the Americans weren't trying to win dogfights. They were trying to win industrially. The Luftwaffe had been forged around brilliance, aces, tactics, finesse. The Americans were building something colder, mechanical, unstoppable. Where German design philosophy was make it agile, American logic was brutally simple. Engine, armor, ammo, altitude, everything else was negotiable. The Republic P-47 was the purest expression of that idea. It wasn't a pilot's airplane, it was an engineer's war machine. The Germans built interceptors like the Bf-109 and FW-190, tight, light, perfectly balanced for short missions. They climbed fast, turned faster, but burned fuel like matches. Their design assumed combat would always happen over friendly territory, minutes from home, minutes from fuel, and minutes from replacement parts. The Americans, they were playing a different game entirely. Their fighters had to escort bombers hundreds of miles into enemy skies, climb high, fight high, and come home again. So they built a plane that could live where most engines suffocated. At 30,000 feet, Luftwaffe engines gasped. The German superchargers simply couldn't feed enough air into their Daimler-Benz and BMW radials. Power dropped. Response dulled. But the P-47's monster R-2800, with its turbo supercharger, didn't just survive at that altitude, it thrived. Here's the cold math. Service ceiling 43,000 feet dive speed, over 550 miles per hour before compressibility, ammunition, 3,400 rounds of .50 caliber, almost triple a Spitfire's armor, 400 pounds of protection, bulletproof glass, steel plates behind the pilot, armored fuel tanks. The Luftwaffe's light interceptors simply weren't built for this kind of endurance. They could win a duel, but not a war of attrition. At 30,000 feet, the sky favored horsepower, not agility, and that was America's domain. German pilots started calling the high-altitude Thunderbolts the Sky Forts. Every time they dove into a formation, the P-47s met them with a blizzard of tracers. It wasn't precision, it was saturation. Where German gunnery prized accuracy, the Americans trusted volume. To the German ace, every burst was a measured act. To the American, every burst was a statement. If one bullet doesn't get you, the next 100 will. That was industrial. Logic, turning the factory into a weapon. Each P-47 was powered by an engine built on an assembly line so efficient, it could produce 1,000 units a month. Each machine gun was mass-produced to be swapped in minutes. Each bullet identical to the last thousands of rounds, feeding the same rhythm across a sky-wide orchestra of destruction. To the Luftwaffe, this wasn't skill. It was insanity. To the Americans, it was strategy. Every battle became a contest between handcrafted brilliance and industrial excess. German aces flew by instinct: trim, flare, roll, shoot. American pilots followed procedure: dive, fire, climb, regroup. One side fought like duelists. The other fought like a machine, and the machine was learning faster. Debriefing sessions filled with new math. At 30,000 feet, a Thunderbolt could dive faster than gravity allowed a Messerschmitt to follow. At 500 miles per hour, the Jug was untouchable. Even if it couldn't turn away from danger, it could fall away from it. American instructors drilled it in relentlessly. If you can't outturn them, outdive them. That single line became doctrine. A P-47 pilot's worst mistake wasn't getting jumped, it was trying to fight the enemy on German terms. The correct answer was simple. Push the nose down, let gravity and that 18-cylinder beast do the rest. German pilots quickly discovered the nightmare that followed. They'd chase the Jug downward, throttles wide open, only to watch the American disappear into a screaming dive, a blur of silver and smoke. Moments later, the Thunderbolt would reappear above them, rolling over, diving again, the first true energy fighter of the war. It wasn't about grace anymore. It was about physics. America had rewritten the rulebook, replacing finesse with force, and replacing dogfighting with energy warfare. The Luftwaffe's tactical brilliance had met its match, American industrial logic, made of aluminum, oil, and 18 roaring cylinders. And the lesson was only beginning, because if you can't outturn them, you outdive them. Every fighter pilot knows the sound. A low, steady thump, 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 thump. 8. Browning M2 machine guns tearing holes through the sky. For most aircraft, guns were accessories. For the P-47 Thunderbolt, They were the core operating system. 8 half-inch barrels, 4 in each wing, 3,400 rounds total, a firing rate of nearly 6,000 rounds per minute combined. On paper, that's overkill. In combat, it was physics, precision, and probability all welded together into something terrifying. The math started long before the fight. Each squadron had its own convergence, setting the point where all 8 streams of bullets crossed. Most pilots set it at about 300 yards. At that distance, the 8 streams didn't make a single point. They made a cone about 6 feet wide. Imagine a moving wall of lead, perfectly aimed, cutting across a German fighter's flight path. If the enemy aircraft entered that cone for even half a second, it didn't just get hit, it disintegrated. But raw bullet count wasn't what made it deadly, it was the mix. Each belt was loaded with alternating rounds. API armor piercing, incendiary API armor. Piercing incendiary tracer, the tracers let the pilot see his fire. The API rounds did the invisible work, punching through armor, igniting fuel, shattering control cables, a perfect blend of science and instinct. Pilots would say, "I don't aim for the plane, I aim for the cloud." They weren't wrong. At 400 MEV, 300 yards meant barely a second of opportunity. Human reaction time couldn't guarantee accuracy, but volume could guarantee probability. Each trigger pull filled that 6-foot cone with 50 rounds in a blink, each one carrying over 11,000 foot-pounds of kinetic energy. That's the probability cloud concept. You're not sniping. You're statistically erasing your target. It wasn't graceful. It wasn't romantic. It was mathematics. At 27,000 feet. A single 50 caliber bullet could punch through 3 or 4 inch of armor at 200 yards. Now multiply that by 8 guns, firing hundreds of rounds every second. That's why Luftwaffe pilots began reporting planes exploding before I was hit, because by the time they heard the rounds, the shockwaves were already tearing through the fuselage. Slow it down frame by frame. Camera gun footage from 1943. A Thunderbolt drops in from above, a Bf-110 dead ahead. The pilot squeezes the trigger. Instantly, a solid beam of white tracers extends forward a shimmering rope of death. In real time, it lasts 2.3 seconds. In slow motion, you can see the entire physics equation unfold. The first hits shred the left engine cowling, the next burst walks up the fuselage, then flash the wing root ignites. The canopy bursts outward, debris spirals, and in one frame, the entire aircraft folds apart. Bf-110 comes apart under the wall of lead. That was no accident. That was design intention. Kartvelli's engineers knew from testing that a sustained 30 seconds of fire, nearly unheard of for fighters of the time, gave Thunderbolt pilots the freedom to stay on target. Spitfires had maybe 7 seconds. Messerschmitts 5, P-47s, half a minute. That meant you could fire, adjust, and fire again without worrying about running dry. When new pilots complained about accuracy, instructors told them, "Don't aim small, aim steady. The jug will do the rest." Because those 8 guns weren't meant to pick a single weak spot. They were meant to overwhelm the entire aircraft. Even heavy bombers weren't safe. Gun camera footage shows Thunderbolts turning Junkers and Heinkels into confetti in seconds. Every burst struck dozens of different angles, ricocheting through metal, tearing open fuel lines. When Luftwaffe pilots began bailing out at the first sight of Thunderbolts diving in, they weren't cowards. They had simply learned the math. At 300 yards, you weren't fighting a man anymore. You were fighting 3,400 rounds of American industry, calibrated into geometry and flame. And for the first time, the P-47's size, its weight, its bulk, its engine made perfect sense. It was never a dogfighter. It was a gun platform, a flying gun range with a turbocharged heartbeat. The laughter at the flying milk bottle had gone silent. Now German aces looked up and saw the truth written in tracers across the sky. The jug didn't just shoot planes down, it erased them. And next, the pilots who learned to use that power would change air combat forever, because there's only one rule left when you wield that kind of firepower. If you can't outturn them, you make sure they never get the chance to turn at all. June 26, 1943, over France. Lieutenant Robert S. Johnson is flying his P-47 Thunderbolt home after escort duty. The mission was routine. The return would become legend. Opening SFX, low drone of engines, wind hum. Cut to radio chatter fading into static. He's just cleared the French coast When it happens, a burst of 20mm fire tears across his fuselage. SFX whump clang sparks. His right wing jerks violently. The cockpit fills with the smell of oil and smoke. The engine coughs, spits, catches again. He's been hit by a Fu-190 diving from behind. Johnson's plane shudders as cannon shells explode along the fuselage. One shell rips through the canopy rails, it jams instantly. He can't bail out. Another explodes near the nose, oil sprays across the windscreen. He can't see. The engine sputters, coughing thick black smoke. He's alone, blind and pinned inside a crippled fighter 20,000 feet above the channel. Johnson wipes at the oil-smeared canopy with his glove uselessly. He kicks the rudder, trying to keep the nose level. The 190 circles back. SFX wind rising, distant growl of another engine approaching fast. The German ace moves in for the kill. He fires again. 20mm shells rake the Thunderbolt's tail, shattering the control surfaces. And still, the jug flies. Johnson later wrote, "I could feel each hit through the pedals. It was like being punched from every direction, but the plane just refused to quit. For 5 full minutes, the Focke-Wulf hammers him. SFX rat-tat-tat boom ricochets, wind screeching. Over 200 hits. Holes everywhere. Fuel leaking. Hydraulics gone. Control cables frayed. Yet somehow the R2800 engine keeps grinding on, coughing, choking, but alive. The cockpit vibrates so violently, Johnson thinks the engine's tearing loose. But the prop keeps spinning, pulling him forward. The German pilot pulls alongside. Johnson looks through the oil-blacked canopy. Just a faint silhouette. The 190 pilot salutes. Then he peels away and disappears. The Luftwaffe ace had emptied his guns and couldn't believe the jug was still flying. That's when the impossible begins. Johnson points the nose toward England. The Thunderbolt limps on one cylinder bank, oil pressure near zero, control surfaces barely functional. The canopy's jammed. He can't bail out even if he wanted to. He glides across the channel at barely 150 miles per hour, altitude bleeding away. Every mile feels like a lifetime. SFX, creaks, loose metal, faint popping engine noise, then miracle. He spots the English coastline. When he finally touches down at Manston Airfield, the Thunderbolt collapses on the runway. One tire shredded, smoke curling from the cowling. Ground crews rush up, expecting to pull a corpse from the wreck. Instead, Robert S. Johnson climbs out, shaken but alive. They count 21 cannon shell impacts and over 200 bullet holes. The control cables? Barely strands of wire. The armor plate behind the seat? Torn and dented but intact. The fuel tanks? Self-sealing, burned but not leaking. That day proved what engineers back at Republic had claimed all along. The P-47 wasn't just powerful. It was immortal. Here's why. Radial engine. No liquid coolant, no vulnerable radiator. You could shoot it full of holes, it would still turn. Armor shell. Steel plates wrapped around the cockpit. An engine turning hits that would kill any inline fighter into survivable damage. Redundant systems. Multiple fuel tanks. Backup hydraulic lines. Heavy framing. Each one added weight, yes, but that weight was a pilot's life insurance. German aces learned to stop wasting ammunition on Thunderbolts. They'd seen too many take hits, dive into clouds, and still make it home. In the cold open, we asked, how could a plane take 200 hits and still land? This right here is the answer. SFX, clinking metal, soft engine tick-down, distant wind. Robert S. Johnson's Ordeal became the gospel of Thunderbolt pilots. If you were in a jug, you could fight harder, dive faster, and survive longer than anything else in the sky. The laughter at 27,000 feet was gone. The Luftwaffe had learned to fear the silhouette of the Thunderbolt, more than its speed or guns, because nothing short of destruction could stop it. Rehook. Calm voice tightening. And just when engineers thought it couldn't get tougher, they gave that tank of a fighter a bigger prop. Brief pause. Engines spin up. SFX. Next, the jug evolves faster, meaner, unstoppable. Winter, 1944. The Thunderbolt changes shape not in silhouette, but in spirit. The engineers at Republic had been quietly working behind the scenes, chasing a single obsession: climb rate. The early jugs could dive like meteors, but clawing back to altitude took patience, too much of it. A heavy fighter that couldn't regain the high ground fast enough was a sitting duck. Then came the upgrade that rewrote the playbook, the P-47D-22, same engine. Same armor, same brute heart, but one radical difference. a 13-foot Hamilton Standard paddle blade propeller. At first glance, it didn't look dramatic, just wider blades. More curve, a heavier hub, but the moment pilots throttled forward, they felt it. The paddle prop bit into the air like a drill. Thrust came on instantly. The jug didn't just rumble forward anymore, it lunged. Test pilots called it like being kicked by a mule. One report simply read, acceleration, violent. SFX, prop spool up rising. Rapid wind rush, low growl of torque. The new blades converted every ounce of that 2,000 horsepower R2800 into pure climb. The result? A 25% improvement in rate of ascent. For the first time, Thunderbolts could stay with 190s and 109s even after a dive. Where once the jug had been the heavyweight that hit hard but recovered slow, it now sprinted upward with purpose. On-screen AB climb chart early D model versus D22. Red line leaps ahead after 10,000 FT mark. German pilots noticed immediately. When they tried to spiral climb away, the silver shape stayed glued behind them, inexorably gaining. Luftwaffe intelligence logged the new model under a chilling codename, Donnerschlag, thunderclap. The name came from its sound, those giant blades. Spinning near transonic speeds at the tips, produced a deep percussive thump like distant artillery. Ground troops could identify a P-47D-22 long before they saw it. The air itself seemed to crack under that rotating wall of pressure. Interrupt waveform visual prop tip speed crossing. Mach 0.85. Audible boom rippling through clouds. To the men flying it, that noise meant dominance. To those on the ground, it meant cover fire was coming. The tactical effect was immediate. Before the upgrade, Thunderbolt pilots had to plan their dives carefully. They could attack from altitude, yes, but regaining position afterward was slow and vulnerable. Now the D-22 changed the rhythm of combat. Dive. Fire. Climb. Dive again. Each sequence tighter. Faster, more confident. Luftwaffe pilots trying to exploit the jug's sluggish climb found the tables turned. The Americans could meet them head-on at 30,000 feet and hold position. The sky that once belonged to the 190s, supercharger band now belonged to the R2800's turbocharged lungs. The Thunderbolt wasn't just a gun platform anymore. It was a true energy predator, SFX. Layered climb raw engine harmonics rising. Oxygen mask breathing quickens, buffeting fades to calm. The speed envelope widened too. With better thrust, even the fully armed and armored P-47D-22 could push 433 mph level at altitude, nearly matching the sleek 190A in its own arena. But it wasn't just about numbers. It was about psychology. The Luftwaffe had grown used to defining the terms of the fight, when to climb, when to roll, when to flee. Suddenly that control evaporated. The Donnerschlag arrived high, fast, and uncatchable. The sky filled with the rhythmic boom of paddle tips, each one a warning that the heavyweights had come to play at altitude. American pilots finally had the confidence to hunt, not just escort. The D-22 marked the moment when brute engineering caught up to tactical brilliance. Cardiffilly's original monster, mocked for its mass, had now found balance. Weight still meant protection, but the new prop turned that mass into stored energy, ready to convert into speed or climb at will. The Thunderbolt had matured. It could fight, flee, or pursue with equal dominance. But beneath the applause in test reports was a single lingering flaw. Even with all its power, all its fire, and all its armor, the jug still had one weakness: range. Pilots could win any fight they reached, but they couldn't always reach it. Rehook. Voice lowers. Range was the Achilles heel. Until tanks and tactics changed everything. SFX. Slow fade of engine hum. Drip of fuel. Soft metallic echo cue next chapter. For all its muscle, for all its armor and thunder, the early P-47 had one painful flaw. It couldn't stay in the fight. Pilots called it short legs. They could hammer the Luftwaffe for 20 minutes, then turn for home, watching their bombers vanish deeper into German airspace. Alone. By mid-1943, everyone knew. Without range, all that horsepower meant nothing. Enter the simplest, ugliest solution imaginable: drop tanks. At first, it was a 75-gallon belly tank, crude, leaky, bolted under the fuselage. It extended reach, but barely. Then came the breakthrough: 108-gallon paper tanks slung under the wings. They were cheap, light and easy to mass-produce, made of laminated paper and glue. Yes, paper. They were built to be used once, jettisoned before combat. But they changed everything. Now a Thunderbolt could take off from England, form up with a bomber group over the Channel, and stay with them deep into Germany. Interrupt on-screen fuel math ticker. Internal 305 gal. Wing tanks plus 216 gal belly, plus 75 gal. Total 596 gallons, 800 plus mile radius. Before, the Thunderbolts had to turn back near the Ruhr. Now they could escort to Regensburg, Schweinfurt, even Berlin. SFX map line races across Europe, rhythmic ticking like a fuel gauge. Prop hum under narration. Mission vignette, August 17, 1943. The Regensburg-Schweinfurt raids 376 B-17s crossing into the heart of Germany. Thunderbolts climb to meet them squat, gleaming tanks slung under their bellies. At 20,000 feet, the bomber stream stretches from horizon to horizon. Then the swarm comes. Dozens of Fu-190s and Me-109s rise to meet them. The Thunderbolts dive. 8 guns light up a literal wall of lead. German destroyers, heavy Bf-110s armed with 20mm cannons, rush the bombers from head-on. The jugs slice in, tearing through the interceptors before they can reach the formation. SFX, machine gun roar blending into thunder. Ricochets, windrush. Brief silence, then a single distant explosion. In just minutes, the Luftwaffe loses a dozen aircraft. The bombers push on. For the first time, the American crews look out their windows and see their escort still there, not turning back, not vanishing over the horizon. That moment, somewhere over Germany, the P-47 stopped being a defensive machine and became a symbol of reach, the long arm of American industry, made manifest in aluminum, fire and fuel. These new long-range missions transformed everything about how Thunderbolt groups fought. Before, they were sprinters, take off, fight near the coast, land. Now they were marathoners. Pilots learned to baby their throttles, balance fuel draws from wing tanks, and jettison them at the perfect moment before combat. Fuel discipline became an art form. A careless burst of power could mean gliding home over the North Sea. Interrupt. Quick overlay cockpit fuel selector, hand-switching tanks. Visual of fuel gauge dropping in sync with a heartbeat. The added range also demanded tactical patience. Instead of random dogfights, groups flew tight formations, staying near the bombers until a strike call came over the radio. Bandits, 10 o'clock high. Then the jugs pounced. Each attack a controlled burst, each climb back to altitude a test of discipline and engine endurance. And when they ran low on fuel, the same drop tanks that gave them reach became expendable, jettisoned with a clatter, as pilots throttled up to fight clean. It was a beautiful paradox. Throwaway tanks that made a heavyweight fighter unstoppable. But the extended range wasn't just about tactics, it was about morale. Before, bomber crews had watched their escorts peel away at the border, their hearts sinking as German fighters closed in. Now they saw those squat silver shapes alongside them, the Donnerschlag still thundering at altitude, spitting tracer fire into anything that dared come close. For the first time, the daylight bombing campaign became survivable. On screen. Mapline reaches Schweinfurt, looping arrow back to England. Mission complete. The Thunderbolt's short legs were gone. In their place stood wings wide enough to carry the war across a continent. The Luftwaffe had to adapt, but soon a new rival joined the fray. A sleeker, faster escort that could run even farther, even deeper. Rehook, tone shifts lower, and when Mustangs arrive, the jug becomes something else entirely, not the shepherd but the wrecking ball. SFX, engines roar, fading into heavy bass rumble, leading into next chapter. He dogfights that once decided the skies were fading into history. Now the real war was on the ground, and the Thunderbolt had found its second destiny. What began as a high-altitude escort had become the deadliest fighter bomber of the war. The jug, built like a tank, armed like a warship, was now America's flying artillery. Pilots called it Jabo duty, short for jagged bomber. And they loved it. The Thunderbolt could carry 2 500-pound bombs, 10 HVAR rockets, and still keep all 8 50-caliber Brownings loaded to the teeth. That's nearly half a ton of ordnance, plus the continuous firepower of a destroyer's deck gun. Each P-47 was a self-contained strike package, no need for escorts, no need for support. You just found the target and erased it. SFX, low engine rumble, diving whistle, thunderous crump 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 of bombs and 50s. Ground POV Normandy. Summer 1944. A German convoy trucks, half-tracks, and a few panzers moves cautiously down a hedgerow road. Engines idling. Radios crackling. Then faintly they hear it. A deep rolling growl across the clouds, not a whistle, not a hum, a physical vibration in the chest. Every soldier on the ground knows that sound. Donnerschlag. Thunderclap, they look up, but by then it's too late. A flight of P-47s bursts through the overcast at 8,000 feet. The lead plane peels over into a 45-degree dive, guns already blazing. 8 streams of 50 caliber fire stitch across the road. Trucks disintegrate, fuel drums ignite. Men scatter in every direction. The wingmen follow one, dropping a 500-pound bomb into the center of the column. Another ripples off a salvo of HVAR rockets. Each rocket hits like a 105mm artillery shell, kinetic impact. Fragmentation cone. Total annihilation. The entire attack lasts less than 30 seconds. When the jugs climb out, nothing moves below but fire. SFX, rocket hiss, distant explosions, rumbling echo fading into wind. For the men on the ground, it wasn't just destruction, it was psychological warfare. The Thunderbolt's sound alone sent German troops diving for cover. The Luftwaffe had Stukas with sirens. The Allies had thunderbolts that made the sky shake. A British infantry officer described it best. When the jugs came over, the earth itself seemed to duck. The secret to this terror wasn't just brute force, it was engineering precision. Those 8 50s fired API armor-piercing incendiary rounds, designed to punch through the thin top armor of vehicles, ignite fuel and fragment inside. Most German tanks had strong front armor, but their tops were vulnerable. A single strafing pass could wreck engines, set off ammunition, and shred crews. Visual explainer, bullet cross-section API core glowing through a tank silhouette. Top armor penetration chart highlights weak zones. The HVAR rockets added another level entirely. Each 5-inch Holy Moses carried the same explosive charge as a 105mm artillery shell, but it was faster and far more accurate from a diving fighter. When fired in pairs, their impact could flip trucks, collapse bunkers and crater bridges. By late 1944, P-47s were credited with destroying more German armor and vehicles than any other Allied aircraft. Even Eisenhower himself said after the war, "The Thunderbolt and the Typhoon were our most effective weapons against the German army." The shift to fighter-bomber dominance reshaped how air power was used. Thunderbolts roamed freely over France, Belgium, and later Germany, cutting rail lines, blasting convoys, hammering retreating columns day after day. They didn't fight for air superiority anymore, they enforced it. Luftwaffe. Pilots began to dread the sight of smoke columns and burnt outer trucks as much as Allied armor did. If you were a German soldier, you didn't need to see the P-47. You only needed to hear that rolling thunder once. SFX, slow Doppler pass of a jug overhead, deep bass rumble shaking the air. By 1945, the Thunderbolt had evolved into the perfect Jabo. Fast enough to survive, tough enough to return, and heavy enough to end the fight in one pass. It was the sound of inevitability of a war machine that no longer asked permission to strike. Brief pause, ambient wind, echo of explosions fading. The P-47 had mastered the art of ground attack, turned its bulk into a weapon of shock and awe. But war was changing again. New machines were appearing over Germany, faster, sleeker, with no propellers at all. Rehook. Tone darkens, lower pitch. The question now was simple. Could the jug, the old thunderclap of the skies, even touch a jet? By the end of 1944, the war in the air was no longer about duels, it was about momentum. And no machine embodied industrial momentum like the P-47 Thunderbolt. Where the Luftwaffe built fighters by the hundreds, the United States built them by the thousands. Republic Aviation's factory at Farmingdale, New York, roared day and night, stamping, riveting, painting. The final tally, 15,183 Thunderbolts. More than any other American fighter of the war, each one was a 10-ton statement of industrial willpower, the product of an economy that had turned itself into an engine of war. SFX, rhythmic hammering, clanging tools, pneumatic drills, fade into the hum of an assembly line. Industrial cadence was everything. Engines from Pratt & Whitney arrived by rail. Propellers from Hamilton Standard by truck. Republic didn't handcraft planes, it manufactured them like refrigerators. Every 55 minutes a new P-47 rolled off the line. Not built for beauty, built for replacement. For every Thunderbolt shot down, 2 more were already being painted olive drab. The Luftwaffe simply couldn't keep pace. German factories bombed, scattered. Desperate for raw materials, were producing 300 fighters a month. America was delivering 2,000. Interrupt on-screen counter sortie rate 1944. U.S. 8th Air Force Fighter Commands 600-plus sorties daily. Ticker races upward. Behind that number stood invisible logistics. Each sortie burned hundreds of gallons of high-octane fuel, consumed thousands of 50-caliber rounds, and wore down engines faster than any pre-war doctrine predicted. But America's answer wasn't to conserve, it was to overproduce. Single-tanker convoy crossing the Atlantic carried more aviation gasoline than the entire Luftwaffe's monthly allotment. Every airbase in England had pyramids of ammunition crates, pallets of new tires, barrels of fuel. If a jug came back shot full of holes, mechanics didn't rebuild it. They replaced parts wholesale. Engines swapped in hours. Wings changed overnight. A German ground crew might spend days repairing a single Bf-109. American maintenance teams turned Thunderbolts around in 6 hours. By 1944, the U.S. Army Air Forces had redefined sustainment as a weapon. Then came the other half of the equation, pilots, where the Luftwaffe was forced to throw barely trained boys into cockpits. America ran an assembly line of aviators. The average Thunderbolt pilot logged 400-plus hours of flight training before combat. Instruments, gunnery, navigation, formation, flying each phase drilled endlessly. By contrast, late-war German replacements often received less than 100 hours total. Many had never fired live ammunition before their first sortie. When Thunderbolt squadrons met these young Luftwaffe pilots, the results were catastrophic. Combat wasn't equal anymore, it was arithmetic. Each American loss was replaced in days. Each German loss was a hole that could never be filled. VO tone slows. Soft underscore builds factory sounds crossfade, with classroom chatter and roaring engines. An American instructor in Florida put it bluntly, "We don't make aces. We make survivors who can fly tomorrow." That philosophy quantity with competence overwhelmed even Germany's most seasoned veterans. By 1944, U.S. airfields were dispatching thousands of sorties every day. Thunderbolts escorted bombers, strafed trains, hit bridges, and hunted flak positions. When they came back, new crews fueled them, armed them, and sent them up again. At peak tempo, the 9th Air Force alone generated over 1,200 Thunderbolt sorties per day. It was a rhythm no enemy could interrupt. This wasn't the romantic age of knights in the air anymore. It was industrial warfare, pure and relentless. Every plane, every gallon of fuel, every round of ammunition was a data point in a larger system, a system designed to wear the enemy down until the sky itself became American property. The Luftwaffe had built elite squadrons. The United States built an air ecosystem. By the time German pilots took off, radar already tracked them. By the time they reached altitude, Thunderbolts were waiting. And by the time they returned, if they returned, their bases were smoking craters. The war had shifted from dogfights to logistics math. And the P-47 was the perfect instrument of that arithmetic, powerful, durable, replaceable. SFX crescendo of assembly line rhythm morphs into roar of formation takeoff. Each engine adds to the soundscape until it becomes thunder. The jug didn't win through elegance or agility. It won through endurance, through factories that never slept, through pilots who were never untrained, through a system that could lose a dozen planes and still own the sky the next morning. By late 1944, the Luftwaffe wasn't just losing planes, it was losing the ability to fight at all. That's what air superiority by attrition really meant. Not a single battle won, but 10,000 fought until the enemy simply ran out of air. Brief pause, distant hum fades, faint metallic ticking. But just as victory seemed certain, a new silhouette appeared over Germany, sleek, silver, and faster than anything the world had ever seen. Rehook. Tone darkens, foreshadowing. All that scale, all that mass production, was about to meet the future, the jet age. By 1945, the war had entered a new dimension faster, stranger, almost futuristic. The skies over Europe were no longer ruled by propellers alone. Now silver arrows with no exhaust trails cut across the clouds the Messerschmitt Me 262's dark jet age. For the Thunderbolt, big, heavy, and proudly old school, this was supposed to be the end. Instead, it became the Jug's final and fiercest evolution. At Republic's New York plant, engineers were already pushing the airframe past its limits. The result? Two beasts born for different kinds of war, the P-47M and the P-47N. The M model was the speed demon. Designed to chase V-1 buzz bombs and Me 262s, it was a hot rod in olive drab. Same R2800 heart, but tuned with new ignition timing, a higher supercharger boost, and a water injection system, the American cousin of the German MW-50 boost. Pilots called it War Emergency Power. 10 minutes of unleashed fury, SFX. Engine tone rises deep. Then sharper, more urgent. With weapon engaged, the M hit 473 mph at 32,000 feet. For a prop-driven machine weighing nearly 8 tons, it was almost absurd, but it worked. Interrupt side-by-side speed ladder. Visual FDAC 190A, 408 MHB F109, G390 Hamish P51D, 437 MHP 47, Sao 73 MH Me 262, 540 MEMF. Not jet speed, but close enough to hunt them when they slowed down. Tactics versus jets. The trick wasn't to chase a Me 262 in open flight, impossible. The trick was to catch it when it couldn't escape. Thunderbolt groups began patrolling near Luftwaffe airfields. They waited high above the runways, invisible in the haze. When the 262s lined up for landing gear down, flaps out the Jug's dove. 850s unleashed in a single pass, a thunderstorm of lead. SFX wind rising fast. Burt! Metal tearing. Quick fade. Jet down. A simple tactic but brutally effective. Of all Allied fighters, the P-47 destroyed more Me 262s in the air than any other. Precisely. Because it could dive faster than any piston aircraft in history past 500 mph without shaking apart. At those speeds, the Jug wasn't just falling, it was weaponized gravity. Interrupt on-screen dive diagram 30,000 FT, 15,000 FT angle sweep. Numbers tick as airspeed surges past 418 TSM. In the right hands, the big fighter could snap roll, fire a 1-second burst, and climb out before the jet even accelerated. Pilots learned to use the Jug's mass as momentum, trading altitude for velocity in split seconds, and when they weren't ambushing jets, the new Thunderbolts were swatting V-1 flying bombs. The V-1 buzz bomb was Germany's vengeance weapon, a pulse jet-powered terror screaming toward London at 400 mph. At first, almost unstoppable, then came the P-47M squadrons. They'd scramble the moment radar spotted inbound V-1s, diving steeply from altitude to intercept. In one of the war's strangest duels, Thunderbolts fought unmanned missiles. Pilots learned to fire from behind, and slightly above a 2-second burst from the 8 Brownings could detonate a V-1's warhead mid-air. Some even tipped them, sliding a wing under the missile's fin to flip it off course. It was equal parts science and insanity. In a few short months, the P-47M destroyed hundreds of V-1s before they could reach British soil. The flying milk bottle, once a joke, was now the wall between London and annihilation. While the M fought the jet age in Europe, the P-47N took the war to the Pacific. It was the Jug redesigned for range. New wet wings carried extra internal fuel, stretching combat radius past 1,800 miles. The wingtips were squared off, the structure lightened, and the airframe optimized for cruise at high altitude. The N was born to escort B-29 superfortresses all the way to Japan, island to island, raid to raid. It could take off from Iwo Jima, fly escort over Tokyo, fight, and return the same day. That range made it the ultimate endurance fighter, the heavyweight that refused to retire. By war's end, the P-47N was arguably the most advanced piston engine fighter on Earth. Fast, long-legged, nearly indestructible, and still armed with 8 guns that could cut through steel. The war was ending, but the Jug's legend was just beginning. It had survived every test, outclimbed its critics, outlasted its enemies, and even stood face-to-face with jets. And the irony? The same pilots who once mocked it as a flying milk bottle now swore it was the best plane they'd ever flown. SFX, Slow fade of engine hum. Echo of a thunderclap rolling through clouds. From laughter to reverence. From underdog to icon. From propeller thunder to jet age survivor. Rehook. Tone softens, reflective. How did the perception flip so completely from mockery to dread? That story belongs to the men who flew it, and the legacy it left behind. In 1943, the Luftwaffe didn't fear the Thunderbolt. They laughed at it. German intelligence reports mocked it as a fliegender Bierfass, the flying beer barrel. Too big, too heavy, too slow. At first they were right. The early jugs struggled to climb, burned fuel fast and seemed clumsy in dogfights. But by 1945, those same reports had changed their tone entirely. Now, the same pilots wrote of a brutal enemy aircraft that attacks from above and cannot be shaken. The Thunderbolt had gone from punchline to nightmare. German field reports show the shift in real time. In spring 43, the large American fighter cannot turn. It is easy to evade at medium altitude. By autumn 44, avoid combat above 20,000 feet. Their speed and firepower are overwhelming. And by 1945, the Thunderbolt's guns are devastating. A single burst destroys the aircraft. Attack only from above if possible. The evolution wasn't just technical, it was psychological. German pilots learned that the Jug didn't need to outturn them. It simply outlasted them. It climbed where they couldn't breathe, dove faster than they dared, and could absorb punishment no other fighter could take. SFX, slow breathing through an oxygen mask. The faint hum of altitude wind cut to the metallic crack of gunfire. The fear had a name. Jabo-Fieber, fighter-bomber fever. For German troops on the ground, the Thunderbolt became a daily terror. They called it Der Sensenmann, the Reaper. Columns moving by daylight was suicide. Even the sound of engines overhead, deep, rumbling. Unmistakable, sent men diving for ditches, abandoning vehicles. Psychological reports from Wehrmacht units noted panic attacks triggered by the distinctive growl of the P-47. You didn't have to see it. You felt it first. SFX. Distant rumble growing, men shouting Deckung. Gunfire and explosions, then silence. What made the Thunderbolt so unstoppable? 5 things, the synthesis of everything America learned about modern war energy. It fought on physics, not flair. Altitude was its weapon. Gravity was its ally. In every dive, it converted potential energy into raw speed, a literal thunderbolt falling from the heavens. Altitude. Its turbo-supercharged R2800 engine turned thin air into horsepower. While German fighters gasped at 25,000 feet, the Jug roared higher, waiting to strike from above. Armor. The Jug could take hits that would disintegrate a Messerschmitt. One pilot, Robert Johnson, brought his P-47 home after taking 200 cannon and machine gun hits still flying. Leaking oil, canopy jammed, blood in his lap. His German attacker, out of ammo, saluted and broke away. Ammo. 8 Browning 50s, each with 425 rounds. That's 3,400 bullets of mixed API and tracer. Together they created a 6-foot-wide kill cone, a probability cloud of death industry. The final weapon wasn't the plane or the pilot, it was the factory. While Germany struggled to field replacements, the US produced new Thunderbolts faster than they could be destroyed. Attrition became a tactic, production became strategy. That's why the Jug worked. It wasn't the best dogfighter. It wasn't the fastest. It was simply the most complete war machine of its kind, the intersection of physics, engineering and logistics. By 1945, captured Luftwaffe pilots spoke of the Thunderbolt with a kind of weary respect. One said, "We feared the Mustangs, but we hated the Thunderbolts." They never stopped coming, another admitted. Even when you hit them, they did not die. They just kept firing. SFX fading quote echoes. Background hum lowers into silence. A brief pause. Then a single metallic clink. The sound of a spent .50 caliber shell casing hitting the table. That was the punctuation mark of the air war, not a speech, not a victory march. Just the echo of industry, logistics, and inevitability. The Thunderbolt began as a joke and ended as a doctrine. It rewrote how air power was built, maintained, and fought through logistics, not luck. And that lesson didn't end with 1945. Rehook. Tone softens, reflective. Because if the Jug taught one thing, it's this. Wars aren't always won by the fastest or the prettiest, they're won by whoever can keep the engines running. So what happens when logistics themselves become the weapon? Soft fade, distant hum of engines. That story begins with the next chapter of the machine age, the Red Ball Express. In 1943, they laughed. The Germans, the skeptics, even some Allied pilots all thought the P-47 was too big, too heavy, too slow. They're a mistake with wings, but history has a way of silencing laughter. By 1945, the skies over Europe no longer echoed with jokes, only with thunder. Thunder from 8 Brownings. Thunder from turbo-supercharged engines. Thunder from a nation that had learned to turn industry into air power. SFX. Deep engine rumble swelling, then fading into stillness. The Luftwaffe's bright stars were gone. The Reich's airfields were graveyards. And the P-47, the flying milk bottle, had outflown, outfought, and outlasted them all. Today one sits silent in a museum hangar. Its paint is faded, its propeller frozen mid-motion. But under the dust, you can still see the burn marks along the cowling, the ghosts of gunfire. Beside it, behind glass, a strip of gun camera film flickers on loop. Grainy frames, a Focke-Wulf breaking apart, a flash of fire, a steady crosshair that never wavers. No names, no faces. Just thunder. A pilot once said it best. You didn't fly the jug, you pointed it at the enemy and let the thunder speak. SFX. Faint echo of 50 cal bursts. Then absolute silence. From laughter to silence, the arc of a machine that became myth. A weapon that didn't just win airspace but defined an era. And as the final shell casing clinks on the hangar floor, the lesson remains. Power, persistence, and production, that's how thunder wins wars. Liked this? Watch the sequel. How Trucks Beat Tanks, the Red Ball Express.